we're walking along here, again, I've noticed you're not treating the plants like a lot of people treat them. So, and I know you've had talked about some experiences of how you maintain the plants for the winter and then the spring, which actually is beneficial to the pollinators and to insects. And it's a treatment of the plants that most people probably would think would be, geez, is his team really taking care of the plants? Right. So, talk a little bit about how you approach, fall cleanup and spring cleanups when you're dealing with these native plants.
Right. So again, we're building ecology. That's the whole idea behind what we're doing here. So when we do our fall cleanups, we basically do our leaf cleanup. We chop, as far as leaf litter goes, we leave as much as we can, chop up as much as we can with our battery-powered equipment, and leave as much as we can lay on the property. Some of our properties we compost, not in this one in particular. But then in the fall, we leave all our perennials up. We don't cut anything back in the fall.
Okay.
We don't do a lot of deadheading on our properties. We want the perennials to go to seed. So there's food sources for the birds. And
so deadheading, just so if anyone doesn't know the term?
So the spent flower heads. The flowers come up, they look pretty, then they die back, and then typically you cut them off.
Yeah.
But we leave them so that they go to seed, and that the seed heads are there for food sources for the birds. And then we leave our plant material up all winter. And our spring cleanup, unlike conventional landscaping where you go in and clean up everything, take every leaf off the property, we go and we just basically cut things back and leave them lay. So the gardens that we've walked through today, we'll cut those down to about 12 to 18 inch pieces, leave them lying on the ground, and then we'll leave the basal stems of those plants exposed about 12 to 18 inches for overwintering and then during the season native bees. For habitat for the native bees.
Right, yeah, because that's, I think, something that a lot of people aren't familiar with, that a lot of insects, beneficial insects, actually overwinter inside the hollow stems of perennials. So they're not just dead stalks sitting there, they're actually serving as a habitat.
Right.
And so by doing what you do, you're actually preserving that habitat, which then increases the beneficials and the pollinators that we see today.
Right. Yeah, as best we can. I mean, it's a balance. Not every client is open to leaving the debris on the ground, but for the most part, in the larger areas, bigger expanses where it makes sense visually, aesthetically, we'll do that. And we'll just touch up some mulch along the edge and leave everything lay in the beds.
Yeah, and that's one of the battles I think that a lot of people face, is that they have to go out and get truckloads or bag loads of mulch and redo the beds every year. Right. And then when you start looking at the carbon footprint, like, wow, all those trees got shredded and ground up, and what really is the carbon footprint of all that machinery and mechanical effort? So.
Right. Well, yeah, and to that point too, it's the allocation of funds, because then that's not something that the client has to pay for every year. So a contractor might say to me, well, how come you're not making that money on the mulch every year? Well, we're doing other things.
Right,
we're putting in more benefit, we're using more perennials, installing in pockets more native plants. Right. There's room for revenue. It doesn't need to be made in mulch.
And then, as you were mentioning before, some of the plants get a little aggressive. Like mountain mint does like to spread around a little bit. You go, okay, it's gotten aggressive, but maybe we'll take some of it out and we'll add a switchgrass, a panicum, or something else in its place.
Right, which, like we talked about, we're planning on doing that because the pycnanthum is a bit aggressive, so we're gonna take some of it out, and that's part of gardening. Yeah, it's trial and error and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and like we were talking off camera before, that's one of the blessings of what we do. Is our clients. Our clients have been great since we started our company. They've allowed us to experiment and we're able to do the things we do because of the experimentation that our clients allow us to do on their properties. So it's been a great relationship with our clients.
And it shows. I mean, your garden is stellar.
Thank you.
So again, thanks for taking me through today.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
So Richard, a lot of people have misgivings about lawn and the turf. And I think the common misconception is that in order to have as large a lawn and as green a lawn as possible sort of represents that you're successful. Status, exactly. Very good word for it. And you have reduced the lawn here. So can you give a little bit of an explanation as to why you reduced the size of it, and perhaps how you treat the lawn in keeping with your battery operated machinery and your very natural look at landscape design and so forth, and so how that integrates into turf management?
Sure. So that simply is we want to, grass is not a pollinator. Grass, I mean, yes, it does sequester carbon, it does cool the earth, but it doesn't have the benefits that native plants do.
Correct.
So we try to, as much as possible, eliminate turf grasses on our clients' properties or turf grass areas on our clients' properties, and incorporate those native plants. And in doing so, obviously benefit the ecology. Granted, you need playing space,
yes,
areas for tables if you're having guests, things of that nature, so we don't advocate pulling out all the turf grass. Generally, we would if we could, but that's not what we advocate for. So we try to find, again, we strike that balance between what the client wants and what we can do as far as our design and incorporating as many native plants as we can into these areas.
That's correct.
And then we manage our turf organically through organic practices.
So can you explain what does organic processes mean?
So the most important thing in anything that we do in any landscape field should be addressing the soil first.
Correct.
Whether it's native plants, whether it's a vegetable garden, whether it's turf grass. Soil testing, addressing the soil, soil biology, making sure the soil biology is active. You need to have the proper fungal, I'm not going to get into all that, but you need to have the proper fungal and bacterial counts. Turf grass is more bacterial dominant, so we do things to bring up the bacterial levels. Obviously pH, relieve compaction, mowing high, we try to mow at 3.5 to 4 inches. A lot of folks want their turf grass cut short. So what we'll do if they're having guests or something like that, we cut, like I said, 3.5 to 4 inches, and then we'll mow it down, maybe sometimes 2.5, and then let it come back up while they're having guests. But it's all about that health of the turf grass and turf grass roots, not having it exposed to sunlight, to allow the sunlight in to germinate the turf grass weeds, taller grass, better photosynthesis, cooler soil temperatures, all those things sort of play into it. And again, the organic process is not a process where you substitute a synthetic for an organic. It's a complete paradigm change.
Okay.
You're not applying a chemical to get rid of a weed. You're improving the soil and improving the turf density to help choke out those turf grass weeds.
Exactly.
So we do all those things within our programs to basically build up the soil, to make the soil healthy, to benefit the grass plants.
So one stat I saw many years ago, which just blew my mind, is that, and I've heard various counts, but on a minimal layer, a pinch of soil, 1 gram, has over 1 billion organisms. That's with a B. And so when you think of how many organisms you're walking on, and that it's not, and we always think of it as dirt, but actually to a plant, it's life. It's what really allows the grass to really exceed itself and grow well. Right,
and that's really what started my personal transition and our company's transition to organics. I took a course in 2005, and they spoke a lot about soil biology, and they were showing images under an electron microscope of nematodes that were being strangled by fungi. And most people would look at that and probably be like, yeah, so what? But I looked at it and I get goosebumps even now when I talk about it. So it's just, it's one of those things that sort of just flipped our whole viewpoint of how we maintain the landscapes on its head. And we've never looked back. To me, it's the only way to manage a landscape.
I think it's great. And again, with the swing set behind us, it's obvious that you do need a little bit of turf. But again, if you can dedicate more of the garden space to plants which are beneficial for the environment, our pollinators, our caterpillars, the birds in turn, I think you're creating a much healthier garden, and I think that's what you're advocating.
I agree. That's 100%.
Okay. I have a lecture done called Happy Hydrangeas, and everybody loves hydrangeas.
Sure do.
And they got to have them in the gardens. And I think one of the things I find most amazing is that some people don't realize that there is a hydrangea native to New Jersey, which I've seen out at the Delaware Water Gap. And it happens to be this one.
Right.
So, but if you look at these, you notice that they look entirely different. And you go, wait a minute, these are both our native hydrangea? So maybe you'd like to talk to that a little bit about the flower type, the structure, and why the lace cap, which looks a little bit less showy, might be more beneficial when we're talking about insects.
Right. Well, the lace caps, like we talked about earlier, it's the native pollinators, through evolution have come accustomed to feeding and pollinating on the native hydrangeas, whereas the ones that have been crossed, they don't have the same flower features, obviously. So you know, you'll get some bumblebees to come to these, but the major pollination is done on the arborescens, hydrangea arborescens.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So yeah, because you see these, when you look at this, you go, well, what am I looking at? And the outside edge, these sterile florets, are the anthers have actually become petaloid. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's so cool, because then all of a sudden, then these reflect UV light. And the pollinators come by and they go, ooh, look at that. There's something there. And then they go to the flower and they go, wait a minute, look, there's pollen in here which is full of protein and we can eat that. So I just think it's interesting, whereas you don't have that with these types of flowers.
Well, yeah, you certainly don't see the two together as a comparison. Yeah, we noticed that. This, believe it or not, this isn't a happy accident. It wasn't intentional. These were mislabeled. And we put them in, and it actually ended up being what it is. So we left them once we noticed what was happening here for that.
Yeah.
You know, it's a great little teaching moment.
Oh yeah, very good teaching moment.
Yep.
So, anyway, I'd just like to say, Richard, thank you so much for taking around your garden today. I know it's not your garden, but it is your garden. So
it's mine.
So we were joking about that earlier. How, you know, when because I obviously had my own business for a while, and when you are so passionate and you put a lot of time into someone's garden, you're like, oh, that's really my garden. So
we like to treat it as our own. So.
Exactly, that we do. So I've enjoyed everything that you've told us about pollinators, how we should be approaching cutting back plants in the fall and the spring, really thinking out of the box, and not just your typical come in, cut it back, mulch it, and then, oh, we don't need all those, you know, big double things, you know, or maybe we do, I don't know, but we really want some of the plants that the pollinators really enjoy. So thank you for all your education today.
Thank you, Bruce, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Asclepias is poisonous to it, but what also is interesting, and forgive me for going back to my 6-year-old daughter's TV show, Wild Kratts.
Okay.
But
one of my favorites.
There was an episode about the monarch migration, and where it gets stuck in a spider's web, the spider actually cuts it out of the web and lets it go, because monarchs themselves are poisonous to the spiders.
Yep. Yep.
Which you just find it to be interesting. So.
No, I think because the monarch caterpillars and butterflies are actually adapted through enzymes to digest the poison in the plant.
Correct.
Whereas the spotted lanternfly didn't adapt with it, so when it eats it, it dies. Yeah. And so which I think is another great selling point for this plant.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, save the monarchs and help eliminate the spotted lanternfly all at the same time.
All at once, exactly.
One plant, two stones.
Done. So, and another thing which we talked about a little bit off camera, but your watering technique is such that you don't overwater the plants, and so you get a more, what's the word I'm looking for, healthier root system.
Correct. We water lighter, try to aim for some consistency, but consistency on the dry side. We want deep roots, healthy roots, not waterlogged, sogged soil or roots. So we tend to run things on the dry side to promote that longevity and the easier transplant from nursery culture into a landscape where you're not going to be consistently watering it all the time.
That's right. Which is why I picked this plant here, because it was just a little bit droopy, but I wanted to showcase the fact that, you know, you don't need to overwater your plants. Sometimes the plants in the wild actually do better with a little bit of dry soil to them.
That is correct. So sometimes it's a bright sunny day on black weed mat, so it's just hot.
Exactly. All right, so Carrie, you have some other plants here.
I do. Actually, I'm going to talk about this one first.
Okay.
So this is mountain mint, or Pycnanthemum muticum, and this is definitely one of my favorite perennials. It is in the mint family, so the leaves are very aromatic. It does spread a little, but it's not aggressive in a bad way. Use that habit for good.
Too will actually be an overwintering site.
Okay. So this becomes home to a number of our beneficials throughout the winter months.
Home and the dinner table.
There you go. Exactly. So by using both, it adds texture, it adds movement, and it adds a home.
That's correct.
I love that.
I also think that with a lot of these ornamental grasses, when we talk about butterflies, people want butterflies in the yard. They're really thinking about those bigger butterflies like monarchs and swallowtails. But there is a huge group of skippers that are very interesting and very, very active, and this particularly switchgrass, is a host to many skippers and a lot of moths too for those ornamental grasses. So while we don't see them and don't notice them like we would notice the monarch caterpillar, they are a host plant for a lot of those other butterflies and moths.
Awesome.
There's also a few smaller of our native bees that when the plant is when the seeds, it is blooming, you'll see them dancing around the flowers too, because it's such a small flower. You're not going to see a honeybee or a bumblebee. It's those little small native wasps and bees that you'll see on them.
Yeah, which is fascinating too, because a lot of people don't realize that our native bees are so tiny that they look like a fly to most people. They don't say, "Oh, there's a bee." So, and actually, since they're not social, they don't have hives, they don't sting you. So they're very friendly. So it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So, and lastly, you had.
I have a couple things here.
Including one of my favorites.
Yep. We're going to talk about that one last.
Oh, okay.
So I have allium, which is an ornamental onion. This is agastache or hyssop. And then your favorite, the Diarvella. Bush honeysuckle.
Bush honeysuckle, yep.
So these two are two of my favorite. And what I love about them is long bloom, a lot of pollinator activity. And the deer don't eat them either.
Yes.
So for a lot of people are in heavily populated deer areas, these are two plants that you can put in your garden that are not going to be touched by deer. The ornamental onion smells like onion.
Yes, it does.
So when you break a leaf, that you'll get that onion smell. The hyssop has a licorice smell to it, and it's in the foliage, it's not in the flowers. So you really get that aromatics to it, and the deer really just like to leave it alone. So the benefit of all the nectar for the pollinators and then pretty flowers for us is, and not deer food, is pretty cool. And then the bush honeysuckle, well, why is it your favorite?
It's indestructible. Everybody looks for a plant that they grow in sun or shade, and as I was mentioning before, I saw it last summer in New Hampshire growing in a crevice in a rock 5 feet away from a river. So obviously it gets flood torrents when the river is really going. We were there in August, and I was just fascinated to see it existing in almost nothing.
Yeah. Well, that's why we like it too, and that is one of the reasons why we decided to grow it. It's a new plant for us this year in our lineup, but we really like that it's just so hardy, and you can really, it's just such a tough plant. It is also a plant that pollinators do love. The flowers are showy, but not as showy as something like this, but that's okay. We like that about it, that the smaller flowers give you something to look at.
And the foliage looks nice.
Yeah, this variety is Ruby Wren, and it has that nice, those early foliage is really burgundy.
Hey, Mary Tabbitt, and I've got Carrie. Carrie, your last name?
Stanker.
Stanker. And Carrie, when did you find the love of plants?
I think it was probably more in college than anything else. When I was a kid, I did like to be outside. My grandparents, all of them had gardens, vegetable gardens, and I did enjoy that. But I really think I found a love for them once I was in college. I was going for landscape architecture, and we took plant courses, and I just think that's when I really just felt good around them and really wanted to learn more about them and work in a nursery and kind of have that bigger part of my life.
Beautiful. So here you plant the flowers. They're native plants.
A lot of them are natives.
Okay.
Not all of them are natives. But they all benefit pollinators. That's our goal here.
Wonderful. So did you have to go back to school to learn a little bit more about the plants afterwards, or did it just come natural with the family background?
I think a lot of it's just stuff that I already knew. Daryl definitely brought his knowledge with him as well, and so together I think we've got a great amount of info to dive into and trying different things, and so really putting us together has been wonderful. But yeah, we didn't go back to school. A lot of plants are kind of basic, food, water, giving it good soil. It's the same as when you're gardening. And the fact that we're not using chemicals has really helped that too. So we're not looking at a leaf saying, well, what's going on? What can we spray? What do we need to address? We look at a leaf and say, is something eating it? Then that's okay. If something is has like a mildew or a fungus, it's obviously the environmental conditions are what's causing that. What do we need to do to mitigate that? And a lot of times it's pruning something back. It might be moving something on the nursery to a different area where there's more airflow. But it's we're kind of back to pretty simple things. So yeah, it's kind of just going with what you know.
Going with nature, because
yes.
you don't have a greenhouse here.
Exactly.
You let nature take its course.
Yep. So we get, sometimes we do get pests, and if you just wait it out a little bit, the natural predators come in and take over and keep that pest population down. And it's very amazing to just watch that happen, and know that we didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to encourage that. It happens because we don't use those pesticides.
Beautiful. So this property that we're at right now,
Yes.
this is your property?
Yes.
Okay. So tell me about that.
My husband and I bought this in 2015, and where we are now, this was all a goat pasture.
Oh.
And so we did have pygmy goats for a while, and we still have a couple. We kept a couple, but we got rid of most of them. And we just were looking to do something different, and my husband kept saying, plants. We know plants. Kara, let's do plants.
Right.
And so it just slowly turned into all of this.
Well, beautiful plants, and just knowing that there's certain types of plants that you need for butterflies
Yes.
and for caterpillars and things that I never even thought of. So
Yes.
I learned a lot today. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Well, glad we got to share this with you.
Thank you. Such a beautiful plant, beautiful color. How do you keep it looking so beautiful?
A lot of it is kind of Mother Nature and good soil, good management practices. We do not spray any pesticides on it or fungicides. This is actually bee balm. It's a Monarda. It's in the mint family, so it's got an aromatic foliage. Most people know the Monarda Jacob Klein with his bright red flowers, but there are other Monardas, and this one has the more pinkish purple, I guess depending on how you see that, flowers. And what's nice is that different pollinators are attracted to different color plants. So the red, most people know to plant red if you're trying to attract hummingbirds, but the hummingbird clearwing moth actually prefers more of that pink purple color. So having great plants with a variety of colors will also attract the most pollinators to your garden.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, I'm Mary Tabbitt, producer of Growing Green. I've got Doug Tallamy here, and he's the keynote speaker of today. Nice seeing you, Doug. So today we're just going to find out a little bit more about you. Okay? Not the specifics of outside, but so when did you get started, and what drove you to be so involved in this field?
I believe I was born this way.
You were born that way?
When I say that, I'm serious. I was born being attracted to nature and really loving it. When I was in 3rd grade, we moved to a new house, and there was a lot next to us, but it had a little pond on it. And they built houses in a circle, so that was the last lot to be developed. And we had lived there a whole year, and I was playing in that pond all the time, and I got to see what emerged at different times. And in the spring, a bunch of toads came and started to sing. I thought that was cool.
Nice.
And then they hugged each other and laid eggs, and that was cool too. And then all the pollywogs were in there, and so every day I'd go and watch the pollywogs develop, and they'd put out their hind legs and their front legs, and their tails shrunk. And the day they started to hop out onto the shore, a bulldozer came and buried the whole thing, and that was the end of those toads. So I was in 3rd grade, but I remember sitting there saying, there are too many people. They just killed all my toads. So I was concerned about this for a long time, but I had the same notion that everybody else had in terms of conservation, and that is we have to save the places that aren't wrecked yet.
Right.
And of course we do have to do that. But I never once thought about revitalizing the lawn, the house where I lived. I mean, I cut that lawn all the time. I never thought about putting plants back there that would actually put nature back right where I lived. Until about 20 years ago. Then I thought about it. And, so I'm an entomologist at the University of Delaware, and studying insects and how they interact with plants. If you're going to talk about saving biodiversity, you've got to know about plants and you've got to know about insects, because you're not going to do it without either of those. So I had the tools for putting this together. It took an embarrassingly long time for it to all fall into place, but finally did. And what was interesting to me is when I started talking about it, that people listened. You know, that's a new experience. Because the timing was right, and it was just accidental, but people are concerned about the loss of biodiversity. They want to know what they can do, and when I tell them there are things you can do, they get excited about that. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, in fact, I think it was Larry that actually talked about certain trees that people should plant for the caterpillars, because that helps the birds. And you know, you don't think about those things when you're just a homeowner and you're not really knowing what to plant in your yard. Yeah.
People think if they put a bird feeder out, they're helping the birds, and they are helping the birds that overwinter that eat seeds.
Right.
But not all of them do. And even the birds that eat seeds, like the chickadee, like the titmouse, 50% of their diet in the wintertime is insects, insects and spiders. So seed helps for sure, but during the summer, or the spring, when they're reproducing, their babies can't eat seeds. So they've got to switch to something else, and they switch to insects, and most of what they're feeding their young are caterpillars. So when I say plant an oak or plant another plant in your yard, that supports caterpillars. You're planting a bird feeder. Then you don't have to feed the birds. The plants are feeding the birds,
take care of them,
and that's the way it always was. And that's a new concept to people. I think, well, just seeds. That's all they need.
Well, that's awesome, and can't wait to hear you speak later today. And you're going to be doing on oak.
The
oak
nature
trees.
of oaks.
The nature of oaks. Okay, thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is John Balaney, owner of Balaney Contracting Company. I'm a certified nursery and landscape professional and proud member of the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association. Each day I get asked questions regarding my field. I welcome each and every question. The one that comes to mind is, can I still plant perennials even though I have deer? Absolutely. A few that come to mind: Baptisia, false indigo, catmint, coreopsis. There's many others, and ornamental grasses as well. Do not let deer stop you from planting. Do your homework, plant right, plant once. Thank you.
If you have a question for a pro, email it to growinggreenaskapro@gmail.com. If your question is selected, you'll receive a Plant Something t-shirt from NJNLA.